Hi there, we're back. We're going to look at some shapes. A couple simple things. Won't get too crazy, but I think that you'll have enough to know how to get crazy yourself. We've so far just been working with the pen and the pencil tool, making our paths and our marks. Now it's time to look at a few other tool sets that Illustrator has that allows us to make more controlled and specific marks, save us time, give us ease, and the ability to create, elaborate shapes without having to actually worry about drawing them. The first thing I'm going to look at is the line segment tool, and you can see it here on the toolbar. It's just a line. If I click and hold, there are 4 other buddies that are included in this group. There's the arc tool, spiral tool, rectangular grid, and the polar grid. Most of this stuff you'll never use, but there might be a time when you need a grid. I'd say that the line will become the most handy tool out of this group. The line tool simply is a path with two anchors and the instructions of however you want to stroke it. So if you draw a line from left to right or whatever, you end up having, as you can see, 2 anchors on either end of the line and a perfectly straight line between them. At this point, I can then address my stroke qualities, the weight of the stroke or the nature of this line, if I want dash lines or rounded caps, put arrows on it, and so on. Did you know that there's this one that's really kind of fun? It's so great. It's the scissor. And if you add a dotted line to that, well, let's do less, 5 and 5 maybe. No, not 55. 5 and 5. Oh, it's just too little because my line's so big. How about 20 and 20? There we go. That's like a coupon thing, right? And I didn't have to really do anything other than draw a line and then just specify what I want that line to look like. So that's just a little bit of recap. Those cool arrowhead features, dash lines. We talked about this quickly with the stroke tool. I'm just gonna set this all back up to none and no dash. And my weight, I'll just leave at 6. All right, so that's the line tool. If I look at the arc tool, if you just start to drag and draw with this thing, you can see that there is an arc being made, and it's also going to have just 2 anchors, one at the beginning and one at the end. If you hold down Shift, it'll keep it constrained to a perfect quarter arc. So that's one way for you to make some marks if you are looking for arc lines. They're going to be, if I select these guys with my direct selection tool, you can see that there are the 2 anchors, and then it just has a nice bezier to it. And I didn't have to think too much about it. I just drew it, and Illustrator did the rest. The spiral tool, it draws a spiral. So there's my spiral. If I delete that and hold down my Command key, I can specify like how intense I want that spiral to be. And if you hold down Command and Option, it'll give you some different options there, or Shift. I mean, just play around with what these different keystroke modifiers do to your spiral. It's wild, psychedelic. You also have a rectangular grid tool. There's my grid. If I hit the arrow up key, it increases the amount of rows. If I hit the arrow right key, it increases the amount of columns. So I can have control over a nice grid. If I hold down Shift, it keeps it constrained to a perfect square. So that's kind of handy. If I went with the left arrow key, it's going to decrease the amount of columns, and if I go down, it'll decrease the amount of rows. So there is a way for you to create a grid if you ever need it. And then the last one is the polar grid tool. And this guy kind of looks like, I don't know, I'd call it radar or something, but you can again use your up and down arrow to increase the amount of rings inside, or the left and right arrow to increase the amount of segments, which you can also say none, and then you just have something that's like a perfect bullseye pattern without the lines going through it. So the modifier keys, again, the modifier keys are pretty helpful if you're going down any of those alternate paths. So then the tool that's underneath that is your rectangle tool, and if you click and hold, you'll see that it also has buddies underneath it. It is the rounded rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, the polygon tool, the star tool, and the flare tool. And these come in handy. I'd say that for the most part, the rectangle or the rounded rectangle and the ellipse tool will be the ones you use most. Polygon tool, once in a while maybe. The star tool occasionally comes in pretty handy. Flare tool is a piece of junk. I don't even know why you'd ever use it. And so you're probably going to put it in your projects now just to drive me crazy. It's fine. You'll see how I feel about that. The rectangle tool, if we just take a look at what that does, it's going to draw a rectangle based on what my properties are for my appearance. So if I look in the properties panel right now, my appearance is no fill and just a stroke. So if I draw it, I'm just going to have, it's going to be transparent. So if I draw a couple of them, you can see that you can see through it because there is no fill. All they're doing is giving me a stroke. However, if I was to flop that with my little flip, what is it called? Does it have a name? Swap, the swap button. Now I have a black fill with no stroke. You can always change this. I could say, well, actually, I do want a stroke, and it's going to be red and very heavy. So there's a rectangle. It's just a polygon, right? 4 sides, 4 anchors, and that tool is just good at drawing those things. If you do notice, however, on the corner of the rectangle are these little circles just on the inside. And what these are, this is a way to make a rounded rectangle without having to use the rounded rectangle tool. And you can specify which corners you only want to have rounded. And so I could do like the two, whoops, hey you. Well, I don't want the rest of y'all's. I only want this one. So I'm using my direct selection tool. So now I'm saying I'd like to have these top right and bottom left corners to be sharp, and I'd like to round the opposite ones. It's kind of fun to play around with these settings. If I want to do 2 of them at the same time, I would use my direct selection tool and say select this point, and I'm going to hold down shift and I'm going to select that point. Whoops, I just moved it. So now those 2 corners are selected. I see that my little rounding option is there, and it'll do them. It's not doing them together because you're a jerk. Why are you not doing them together? It's supposed to do them together. Well, and there they are. Now they're doing it. Weird, whatever. Play around with it, you'll get the hang of it. So that is a modification you can do with the rectangle tool. I'm going to select those, get rid of them. And now if I chose my rounded rectangle tool, you can see that it gives me a rounded rectangle. And those corners, again, can be modified. So I don't know why they gave us a separate tool for rounded corners, because you can just do it yourself when you want to. In fact, I can push that little circle thing out all the way to the edge, and I'll have a sharp cornered rectangle. But I would say definitely get used to modifying your corners. It's pretty great. Speaking of those corners, they're going to be there for any anchor now that you have. I'll delete you, and let's just say I using my pen tool, and I was making some shape. And there's my polygon with my pen tool. Anytime I pass over a corner now and select one, hey you, direct selection tool, I select a corner, you can see that I do have the option to round it. So take a look for that little modifier, because it's pretty great. We have the ellipse tool. The ellipse is going to draw you circles. Okay, I'm holding down Shift while I do that because it keeps them beautifully constrained, so they're perfect. If I don't, then I can get oblong ellipses. Sometimes you want them, sometimes you don't. Just get used to that Shift key modifier and see what happens. The Polygon tool is going to give me a polygon, and this polygon currently has 6 sides, but I can use my arrow key to increase the amount of sides. I could lower it down just to a triangle, so I have a 3-sided polygon. So the arrow keys are pretty great. The other thing going on here with a modifier is that you can hold down, come on, we can do this. Oh no, it's just with the star key, so forget it. That's it for now. Boom. Now the star tool will draw you a star, and as you can see, you can increase the points by pressing up or down on your arrow key. And then the modifiers here, Command will take the points and extend the radius of your points, or you can hold down Option, and that's going to change the radius of the inside first. So I could say, like, I want to start out here, whoa, no, and then increase my points. So play around with the 2 tools, not 2 tools, but the 2 modifiers, and see that you can change, the inside of it versus the outside, depending on which button you're pushing and when you push them, or let go of them. It's pretty cool. So there's that shape tool, and I'm not even going to talk about the lens flare tool because I wish that they didn't even have it, the flare tool. If you want to play with it and just see what it does, go ahead. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste your time. So any of these shapes that you've created have the properties of the fill or the stroke, opacity and whatnot, and you can affect them just like you can anything else. So like, look at the interesting form that happened as soon as I said I'd like to dash my line. It's really great. And if I chose to put a round cap on there, that changes the properties of those things as well. So just, before really putting a whole lot of investment into this thing, I can get some really neat patterns and designs just by modifying something as simple as the stroke. All right, so there's your shapes. Hope that helps, and we'll see you in the next movie.